Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on my regular update to Virginia media, and we may be joined by some national media today as well. I think at the top, I'll just reiterate the announcement that the Budget Committee made last night, that the Democrats on the Budget Committee have come together on a plan to invest $3.5 trillion of new funding over the next 10 years in critical areas for our country. This is a fiscally responsible plan. I've been working night and day on trying to both get the pay-fors in line and where these investments will be made. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we've not even briefed the balance of the Democratic caucus, and the president's coming up today. But suffice it to say, as I mentioned last night, I think this is a moment in history when the United States needs to reassert itself in terms of how it deals with its families, our families, how we deal with children, how we deal with the existential crisis of climate change, how we make the kind of investments we need to compete with China. And in all those areas, climate change in particular, this will be far and away the most significant investment and policy changes that we'll ever make on child care and on preschool. We're going to try to honor the approaches that the president has put forward, the free community college for the first 2 years, another goal of this initiative, trying to make sure that we start down a path to have those folks who take care of our parents, oftentimes at home or disabled, have a better career path, and to do that in a way that makes the tax code a lot fairer. I think there's enormous feeling across all Americans these days that too often people at the very top of the pyramid get away without paying their fair share of taxes. And I think we're going to try to bring some of that tax fairness back to our system. That being said, to try to pull off that process at the same time we deal with infrastructure, and that's what I really want to spend most of my time talking about today, because again, I think that's an area where we're about to make the kind of long overdue, literally once in a generation investments in infrastructure. We know the president and a group of my Republican colleagues had spent weeks negotiating on a roughly $300 billion in new spending project over 5 years. Those negotiations fell through, but there were a group of us, in many cases the same people who came together back in November, December timeframe for the last COVID relief package when we didn't see so-called leadership moving quick enough. We put together the bipartisan group of 10 of us, and we've come up with a $579 billion investment in infrastructure, and what's more traditionally viewed as hardcore infrastructure: roads, rail, water and sewer. Broadband is included at a level that's never been seen before. And even in this legislation, we make dramatic down payments once in a generation on changing out and making our electric grid much smarter, less dependent on carbon emitting fuels and more energy efficient. We make record investments in EV, electric vehicle infrastructure. I mean, you can't buy your electric vehicle and drive it if there's not from Richmond to Washington, oftentimes, unless you know where some charging stations are. And we need to see the emergence of charging stations take place the same way there was emergence of gas stations back in the 30s as we moved from one fuel source to another. We need as well, I think, that we're making down payments in this legislation on trying to make sure things like our bus fleet is made more carbon friendly. In many ways, you think about how many thousands of school buses, and we've got a number of Virginia companies that were in the school bus building business. Most of those school buses are going to be electric or low carbon. There's going to be one or two places they're going to be built. China, where unfortunately about 95% of the current electric bus vehicles are built, or the United States. To jumpstart that industry here in the United States, which will also benefit Virginia, we need to make these investments. So That bipartisan plan, also, we're working through that on how we're paying for it. It's going to be a bit more challenging because on one hand we have our Republican partners not willing to in any way raise taxes, and Vice President Biden is not willing to use user fees, the traditional source of funds that have been used to pay for infrastructure. So we are repurposing some of the earlier spent funds. We've kind of looking in every nook and cranny on where we can find some additional resources. One area that is being discussed for either the infrastructure plan or the reconciliation plan, or potentially both, which is how do we make sure that taxes that are actually owed are paid? Every Treasury Secretary living, Democrat or Republican, have said we leave literally hundreds of billions of dollars on the floor each year with not having effective tax enforcement. Now, this doesn't mean generating a whole host of new rules. It simply means enforcing the existing rules. And too often, particularly under President Trump, where there was almost a wink and a nod that that you could avoid paying taxes if you had the right advice. We got to reverse that. And even the IRS commissioner appointed by President Trump have said over 10 years we could generate an additional $1 trillion. So more to come on that, and our hope is that piece of bipartisan legislation may be up on the floor as early as next week. A couple other quick topics. Coming out of COVID, and now again, I urge all fellow Virginians to go ahead and get vaccinated. But one of the tragedies that took place last year was what happened with some of our federal workforce. There was someone in Northern Virginia, Chai Sutam Unat. I apologize on mispronouncing a bit of his name. Passed away as a federal employee. We have reintroduced legislation, particularly as we think about the potential of the COVID variant coming out, to make sure that every federal workplace is transparent on how it keeps, how it's going to meet appropriate safety standards and cleanliness standards with COVID. We had legislation on this last year. We're reintroducing with Tim Kaine and a number of other senators, bipartisan way, to bring that legislation back. And then finally, starting tomorrow, there's going to be, again, I think something that is real, tangible, good news for about 250,000 children in Virginia. One of the things that we put into the American Rescue Plan back in March was an expansion of the child tax credit that meant for about 85 to 90% of Virginia's kids, if you're going to be receiving a check in the mail starting tomorrow, once a month, of $250 per child, $300 per child on a monthly basis if your child is under 6. And this child tax credit, both expanded and fully refundable on a monthly delivery basis, I think will help be able to, been estimated to lower child poverty across the country in half. That means about 250,000 of Virginia's kids will get access to this benefit starting tomorrow. That is a tangible result of what President Biden has put forward and what we have then legislated. So a bit of good news relief for a lot of Virginia families. And let me make sure I mention, if you want to figure out how you get access to these funds, or if you don't receive your payment shortly, you go to childtaxcredit.gov, and you can easily figure out how to make sure that your family and your children are eligible for that benefit. Final comment. I want to make sure we get time for plenty of questions. I hope to be introducing, if not the end of this week, early next week, a comprehensive cyber incident reporting legislation. We've seen with the Colonial pipeline hack, with SolarWinds. It feels like every other day there's a new cyber hack taking place or ransomware request. The crazy thing is right now, there is not even a requirement that a business that gets hacked notify the government. And the government can't do this alone. We need to work in conjunction with the private sector to make sure that our government resources are focused on following up these cyber incidents. The private sector cyber defense companies are notified as well, that we've got an ability to trace where businesses are paying ransomware. And we've worked with the business community. I hope to have virtually every member of the Intelligence Committee, my lead co-sponsors, my Vice Chairman, Marco Rubio, broadly bipartisan, where I think the country will finally start putting in place something I've been advocating for a long time, a comprehensive cyber strategy to deal with what I think is one of the great threats of our time. So again, hopefully some big news on that in the next couple of days. And with that, Val, why don't we turn it over to you, and I'd be happy to start taking questions.
Okay, the first question today comes from Michael Martz at the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Yes, good morning, Senator. I received a letter from the White House, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, about the payment for the way to pay for the infrastructure plan, and they're rejecting the use of clawbacks to repurpose money. What is your response to the four Virginia mayors, including Alexandria and Richmond, signed it?
Yeah, well, Michael, first of all, there is roughly $80 billion that is being repurposed from some of the earlier COVID legislation that's not been spent out. There are certain dollars where the programs haven't even launched, so it would be unfair and I think inappropriate if you've got a new initiative that somebody hasn't even been able to apply for yet, and you would somehow sweep those dollars. So we are going through, particularly the COVID relief, not so much the American Rescue Plan, but the COVID relief legislation to find some of those unspent dollars and repurpose them. We've also made sure that we are capturing those dollars that had been already, in a sense, scored with the CBO, that we're going to go out on the enhanced unemployment. Those states who've decided not to give that enhanced unemployment, we're trying to sweep those dollars. I've mentioned some of the questions around tax gap. There are a series of other tools that we're using, but I do think you ought to, Michael, I should have made this point in my opening comments. This bipartisan infrastructure plan that we put together has been endorsed by the President of the United States. It's been endorsed by, I know, the Conference of Mayors and all the local governments and counties across the country. It's been endorsed by 24 different business organizations and labor organizations. I think we all know from driving on potted roads or coming into airports that seem third world, or the lack of regular train service, particularly as we think about better trains to Richmond, down through the peninsula to Norfolk, trying to extend rail past Roanoke into Southwest Virginia. This should be a no-brainer, but nothing's easy in this town. But I do think what the mayors have suggested, we are using that source of funding as one of the sources.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Mitchell Miller at WTOP.
All right, thank you, Senator. Two questions on two different topics, if I could. First, related to the bipartisan infrastructure plan, since you've been so deeply involved in it, are you worried about losing some of the Republican support in connection with that? And then the second question, unrelated, if I could just get your reaction to the appointment of former Park Police Chief Robert McLean to review the practices of law enforcement under Interior in the wake of how Park Police dealt with protesters in Lafayette Square.
Well, let me take them in the order you gave them. I actually think we're going to have many more than 10 or 11 Republicans supporting the bipartisan legislation. Again, if you can claim you're making a historic investment in infrastructure and you're not having to raise taxes for it, what's not to be in favor of? And quite honestly, every one of our Republican colleagues know that we were going to go back and do this so-called reconciliation plan. If some of them bail as this goes forward, at the end of the day, that's not because they didn't know this was coming. And I'm counting on the same kind of good faith that got us through the November-December timeframe on the last COVID package to work out here. I've been around the track now a few times, Mitchell, and these deals have a tendency to wax and wane, or up and down, whatever terminology you want to use, and we'll have a couple of tough times over the next couple of days, but I really expect and hope that we will at least start on this legislation next week. And I think it's an important signal, not only in terms of the record amount of investment, but one of the things we're hearing back I'm hearing from folks in the intel community, I'm hearing from folks who are in the administration, in the State Department realm. One of the questions people are asking around the world is, can American democracy still work? And I think beyond the record investment in infrastructure, showing that we can still put together a broad bipartisan plan on this subject is important when we see questions about our democracy and when we see efforts in some of our states, frankly, to restrict voting rights, which is something we're going to have to come back to. In terms of the Interior Secretary taking the former Chief McClain, I'm pretty disappointed. This is an individual that not only was engaged with the, I believe, inappropriate activities that was the Trump photo op that was a disgrace in Lafayette Park. But Mitchell, as you know, this police chief was also the person that buried the efforts for sitting United States senators, not just me, Chuck Grassley, the ranking or senior Republican in the Senate, to get information about the death of Bijan Guzar. Bijan's death, we still have not gotten all the answers. His family deserves answers. Thank God, at least the Fairfax County has started prosecuting this case. And the gentleman who was at that point the chief of the Park Police was not cooperative in any manner. So I am disappointed with that choice.
Next up, we have Nathaniel Reed with Newsy.
Hi, Senator Warner. Thank you so much for doing this. Just a couple of quick back-to-back questions for you. The first, to pay for this plan, is there going to be any change to the 2017 tax code, that Republican Tax Cuts and Jobs Act?
Well, on the infrastructure plan, no. On the reconciliation plan, clearly there's going to be some efforts to make our tax code fair. And if you're going to make your tax code fair, as you read about some of the wealthiest folks in our country not paying any taxes, you're going to have to revisit the 2017 tax code.
Gotcha. And then the other question for you, so some sort of change for folks making probably over $400,000.
Things the president, one of the things the president's been adamant about, and I haven't fully agreed with him on things like user fees, but he has been adamant about any of the changes in the tax code that made the most well-off, chip in a little more, go back to some of the earlier levels, or really trying to make sure that we don't continue to incent businesses to build a factory in Germany as opposed to a factory in the United States. We can go after that, but he does not want any of these changes to hit folks under $400,000, and we're going to try to we're going to make sure we adhere to that.
Great. And then just about the climate portions of the bill, can you talk just a little bit about what's in there to help with the climate?
Let's one piece I can talk about a lot, the other I can't. One of the things I don't think, and I want to give credit to my friend Joe Manchin on this, because he helped push some of our Republican colleagues. Even in the infrastructure bill, there's roughly of the 570 billion, about 100 billion that is invested in the energy sector on making our energy system cleaner. For example, there are record investments in a cleaner and smarter grid. I've been hearing about smart grid since I've been in the Senate for 12 years, and we've not made much progress. Now there's real investments being made in the infrastructure plan. I already mentioned electric and low carbon buses. I already mentioned electric charging stations. I should mention as well capping orphan wells. Oftentimes, wells that have been turned off still are emitting. There is a plan here to capture some of that runoff methane or carbon. And there are about a dozen different initiatives in the infrastructure plan around greener energy. In the reconciliation plan, again, I'm going to make sure that since I've not even briefed my non-budget Democrats on this, we are looking at use of the tax code. We're looking at other areas where we can invest. We're looking at things around questions around how can we even make some of our agricultural production more climate friendly? Are there as I mentioned, incentives in the tax code? Are there things as we look around the rest of the world? There are a number of countries, some of our business competitors, for example, the EU or Canada, are putting in place, in a sense, border adjustment fees, so that if some country doesn't have any constraints on carbon, is producing a product in an extremely dirty manner, and in your host country you're putting in some more carbon restrictions, well, that gives that foreign business an unfair advantage. And if countries like the European Union and Canada, that the UK is looking at this as well, are putting in some of these border adjustments, I think not only for the sake of the climate, but also for the sake of business competitiveness, we need to look at that initiative as well. And I do think, when you see the fires in the West, when you see the heat waves, when you see I can't remember a time when we've had as many 90-plus degree days in June as we've had this year. I think only those, for either political reasons or ignorance, can be the only ones that are still deniers that our climate is changing, and unless we take dramatic movement, we're not going to leave our kids with the same kind of planet that we inherited. And frankly, as a former business guy, I also look at this as probably, as the head of Blackstone, one of the largest money management firms in the world, said the other day, this is about a $60 trillion economy around clean energy. Right now, the remarkable thing is, even though China has not cut back, for example, as much as it should on coal-fired power plants and others, China dominates the wind business, the solar panel business. Unfortunately, they're moving very quickly in the low carbon bus business. So there are climate reasons to do this. There are economic reasons to do this as well.
The next question comes from Kelly Meyer at Nexstar.
Hi, Senator. I know some have already touched on the pay-fors, but I did want to ask a bit more on the $3.5 trillion. Where the Democratic caucus is on this. Are they unified? Is the 3.5 too high or not enough? And what do you expect to hear from the president at the lunch?
I hope the president's going to come forward and be very supportive of this initiative. I obviously have been talking with the White House, some of my more progressive colleagues, Leader Schumer. This was the result of an intense negotiation process. We've got to get a plan that all 50 Democrats can agree upon. Any single Democrat could upset this plan, so we've got to show some unity. And some of these decisions, I'm not going to go through all the pay-fors until we lay out to my colleagues first, but the way the whole reconciliation process works, and this is more than a little bit arcane for my friends in the Virginia media, is the first step is you set a top line, and then you give committees a number that are a component part of that top line. And for example, I'm on the Finance Committee, that will probably have the biggest number. How you get to that number, how much you raise in taxes versus new initiatives, is kind of then jump ball left to the committee. It's not, so spelled out. There'll be some guidance in these, in the budgetary resolution outline, but all the specifics won't be worked out until this is thrown back to the committees and worked through. So the first step is get a budget resolution through. You've got to hold all 50 Democrats. The next step, where the policy decisions are really ground through, will take place through the balance of the summer and into the fall.
And that is all the time we have for questions today.
Thanks, everybody, very much. Stay safe. I hope, disappointed nobody cared about cyber on the call, but my hope is to get this introduced in, if not this week, early in the next couple of days. I want to try to make sure we get as many on the Intelligence Committee as possible to send a strong signal that it's time for our country to step up on this really critical national security issue. Thanks so much.